The word adventure gets used to describe a lot of things that are not really adventures. A trip to Disneyland, a vacation in Cabo, safe, predictable things that are not adventures. Adventures have to be dangerous. By the very definition of the word, there has to be a risk, a challenge that you may not live up to, a perilous journey. But it also has to be unusual. It has to be different. Anyone who has spent more than 5 minutes riding a motorcycle knows that motorcycles are inherently risky. And while commuting to work on a motorcycle is dangerous, it's not really an adventure. If you want to go on a motorcycle adventure, you need to be prepared to go on a long journey to dangerous and unique places. And you need a motorcycle that is capable of a motorcycle adventure. Like an adventure motorcycle. You've seen them probably a lot lately. They are all over the place. But what's the deal with all these adventure bikes? Why have they gotten so popular over the last few years? I decided to find out. I adventurized my bike and took it along the Colorado Backcountry Discovery route from Four Corners to Wyoming over several 12,000-foot mountain passes, up rocky hill climbs, along perilous cliff edges, and through so many water crossings. So join me as I discover the allure of the adventure motorcycle. You see them all over. They are the SUVs of the motorcycle world, driven by people looking to take their bikes everywhere, and by people who want to look like they take their bikes everywhere. Adventure motorcycles have exploded in popularity over the last few years, but they've been around for over 40 years. Probably the first example is the BMW GS, which appeared in 1980. This was BMW's endeavor to make a bike that was as capable on-road as it was off-road. In fact, the GS stands for Geländestrasse, which in German means terrain, street, or off-road, on-road. The GS is still the best-selling adventure motorcycle, but there are a lot of competitors these days. A lot of people will buy an adventure bike when they never intend to take it off-road, in the same way that a lot of people will buy an SUV and never drive anything more treacherous than a parking lot. And this is fine. People like the space, comfort, and seating height of SUVs, and some people prefer the ride, look, and seating position of an adventure bike more than a cruiser or a touring bike. The seating position is really nice. It's a great middle ground between the Harley Starfish and the sport bike guys who look like they're humping the gas tank. At its core, the adventure bike is really the sweet love child of a touring bike and a dirt bike. Some adventure bikes fall closer to the touring side and some are more dirt-oriented, but all adventure bikes fall somewhere on this spectrum. Some of you are pointing out that I have previously owned an adventure bike, the Honda CRF 250L Rally that I rode from LA to Las Vegas all through the desert. And while you could call this an adventure bike, it's not great at highway riding and it's not great at dirt riding. It does both, especially if you upgrade all of the suspension, but it's not really up to big adventures, and I want to go on a really big adventure. So I made an adventure bike. This is my Husqvarna 701 Enduro. It's not sold or marketed as an adventure bike. It's an Enduro, which is a dirt bike you can take on the street. I like this bike. In fact, it's basically the third one that I've owned. The previous two were KTM 690s, which are pretty much the exact same motorcycle. One of them met its maker when a teenager in a Ford Mustang decided to run a stoplight and turn my left leg into a slinky. Anyway, I like the bike, enough to have bought a third one. Enduro bikes are very close to dirt bikes on the adventure bike spectrum, but the 701 is more street capable than some Enduros. It has balancing shafts in the engine to smooth vibrations, it's heavier and more stable at speed, and it has plenty of power to propel it down the highway. It's pretty easy to make this into a full-on adventure bike, which I did. I swapped out the terrible seat. KTM and Husky have always been keen to throw on seats as comfortable as 2x4s, but this one makes the long rides much more bearable. Next is luggage, a couple of saddlebags or pannier bags if you want to sound fancy. These are held on with steel racks mounted to the frame, and the obvious upgrade, the rally tower. Adventure bikes need a windshield and something behind the windshield to mount your navigation aids and your camera, because what's the point of having an adventure if you can't show everyone how adventurous you were? This tower is from Raid Garage. I think it's pronounced Rade Garage. It's nice, lightweight, comes with 2 headlights, a windshield, and some side pieces that I didn't put on. It's kind of expensive, but it did come with a mount for a steering damper, which I wanted to add because the front end can get a little loose at speed when you load up the back with luggage. Another common adventure bike accessory is a large fuel tank. I almost added one to my bike, but decided against it, opting instead for one of these tube canisters that perfectly fits a 30-ounce MSR bottle full of extra gas. Have you ever been walking along a quiet hiking path in the mountains of Colorado and you start thinking about how you would love to rip down that path on a dirt bike at 40 miles per hour, but also do that for a week straight? Then you should consider riding the Colorado BDR. BDR, or Backcountry Discovery Route, is a non-profit organization that creates off-highway routes for adventure bikers. There are routes all over the western United States, from Canada to Mexico, and some in the east as well. We will be taking the one through Colorado. We is me on my adventurized Husky 701, and my friend Ted on his actual adventure bike, the KTM 890 Adventure R. This route starts in Four Corners, the junction of 4 U.S. states, and crosses over several mountain passes and nearly 700 miles of Colorado dirt roads and trails. It is impossible to tell how difficult this journey will be, even though it has been done many times by many people. It's impossible to know the difficulty for two reasons. One is that the trail is dynamic. The weather in Colorado changes from hot and sunny to hail and back, sometimes multiple times in a day. The trail gets muddy, water crossings get deeper or shallower, and rock slides will change the face of mountain passes in an instant. Also, people have different things they're good and bad at, and different bikes that are good and bad at different things, and people are often not great at judging their own abilities. The consequence of this is that someone will ask on a forum if a particular trail is difficult, and the answers will range from, "I could do this 2-up on a Road King," to, "This is literally impossible and you were a fool for even asking." So, we're just going to do it and see what happens. For my previous motorcycle adventure, the desert ride to Vegas, I only went on one ride to prepare for it, which was a huge mistake, and I am not the type of person to make the same mistake twice. So, before going on this journey across Colorado, I prepared by going on not one, but 2 practice rides. So, I'm basically an expert. We did truck our bikes from Southern California, which eliminated some of the adventure, but it allowed us to skip the 118-degree heat, so that was nice. We also did some sightseeing along the way. We unloaded our bikes in Farmington, New Mexico, which is several miles away from the start of the BDR in Four Corners, but that's where we stayed the night, so that's where we started. We rode up to Four Corners to see the less than impressive tourist attraction, and then headed into Colorado. You could easily start this journey in Cortez, Colorado. It's all pavement up until then. Shortly after that, the road turned to dirt, and we got to do what adventure bikers love to do more than anything: stand up on our bikes. Adventure bikers love to stand. It's literally their favorite thing. Sitting down is for retirees on gold-wing trikes. You're not really riding unless you're on your feet. They stand at the movie theaters. They stand when they're using the bathroom. Number 1 and number 2. Adventure bike riders do not rise for the national anthem because they are already standing. The first day is pretty chill, lots of gravel roads, some switchbacks. This is good. You need a day to get your off-road balance back and your confidence. I went into a corner a little hot after losing a tiny bit of traction and decided to take my chances with a shrub in the ditch rather than leaning over more. Minor off-trail issue, and certainly the last one we will see. We also ran into a puddle large enough to be called a water crossing. They don't get bigger than this, do they? Surely not. I don't know if this was technically a mountain pass, but we did some switchbacks up to an 11,000-foot crest and back down into some really beautiful southern Colorado scenery. The BDR routes are all on public roads, so you are sharing the roads with lots of other people. Cows, mostly. You're mostly sharing it with cows. But there are other people, side-by-sides, gravel bikes, livestock, and Jeeps driving way too fast. Mid-afternoon, under cloudy skies, we approach my favorite little mountain town that I cannot afford to live in, Telluride. For communication, Ted and I are using the Sena 50C. Quick note here, Sena sent me these for free after seeing me use their other devices in my LA to Vegas video, and Climb gave me a discount on the jacket and pants I used. Everything else I paid full price for. Just want to be clear about this kind of stuff. Anyway, the Senas were great for communications and for getting video. Highly recommended. We left them on the default channel, so a few times on this journey, we got to chat with some strangers who were doing similar things.
Hi guys.
What's up?
Hey guys. Oh yo.
Day 1 was mostly chill, a good warm-up with a few interesting features. We rolled into Telluride, got some pizza, and looked up at the treacherous path down the mountain that was in store for us the next day. There is a famously difficult off-road trail conspicuously absent from the Colorado BDR, and that is Black Bear Pass. The town of Telluride is in a box canyon. That means it's surrounded on 3 sides by mountains, and there is only one way in or out. Kind of. There's only one way out. There is another way in, and it's over an incredibly sketchy mountain pass that is both technically challenging and also has sheer cliffs, so the consequence of you not living up to the challenge is that you get to go home in a box. The old saying is that you don't have to be crazy to drive this road, but it helps. I always wanted to do this on my 4Runner, but I've never been here with my 4Runner. But I am here now with an adventure bike, so even though it's not part of the BDR, we did it anyway. Black Bear Pass is one way, so you have to drive out of Telluride the long way around to Ouray, and climb up a mountain highway to a sketchy mountain road. I had a lot of trouble getting up the rocky, steep hill on the way up to Black Bear Pass. More than once I stalled the bike and had to push it to a flat area and start again. Part of this was gearing. I have a set of street wheels and tires for this bike, and I chose sprocket sizes that make it easy to switch between the dirt and street. But the consequence of this is that the dirt gearing is too high for this stuff. So I spent a lot of time pulling in the clutch, which really wore out my wrists and hands and the clutch. If I were to do this again, I would definitely get lower gearing with different sprockets. In fact, I'll probably buy a new front sprocket and chain for off-road. The other thing that was killing me here was kind of a dumb mistake, but this bike has traction control and it has 2 settings. 3 actually, since you can turn it all the way off. Setting 1 is for riding on the road. I forgot to change it, and it is terrible off-road. As the back tire slips, the ECU cuts the fuel and kills the power to keep it from slipping. And when you're going up these inclines with rocks and sand everywhere, it just kills the power so much that you'll stall the bike. Setting 2 is for off-road and is so much better. By the way, the tires we both used are Motoz Rals? I don't know how to pronounce this, but they are great tires on road and off. At the top of the pass, we both smelled gasoline, and it took us a moment to find the source. Ted's motorcycle has much bigger fuel tanks than mine, and KTM designed it to sling the tanks around the side of the engine to get the mass as low as possible. This is pretty cool, except that being right next to the engine and radiator, it does get hot, and with an altitude of nearly 13,000 feet, it started to boil. As we began to descend down towards the town, we ran into a long line of Jeeps stopped on the trail. We need a word for a group of Jeeps. A Joop? A Jeep load? A Rubicongress? Jeeps are the worst. No, I'm kidding. Side-by-sides are the worst. Jeeps are fine. Unfortunately, we ran into a very large group of Jeeps and Toyotas, and they were going very slow, so we were just kind of stuck in traffic. This is the big problem with Black Bear Pass. It's one way, but there's a lot of slow traffic. If you're doing this on a motorcycle, I recommend waking up very early. There are worse places to be stuck in traffic. In fact, literally every other time in my life that I've been stuck in traffic has been less desirable than this, but it did come with some drawbacks. Bikes have to go faster than cars on stuff like this. The Jeeps need to crawl down the rocks and ledges in low range. But if you do that on a bike, you'll just fall over. You have to maintain some speed to maintain control of the bike. The Jeeps were going way too slow for us, so we had to stop and wait for a long time. The issue with this is that you really need to be in the right headspace to ride a bike down this road. One of the worst things you can do on a ride like this is to ride timidly and second guess yourself. You have to commit and you have to trust yourself. And every time the Jeep train stopped, we would relax, calm down, and lose focus. Then we'd fire up the engines and in our calm, unfocused state, navigate another section of one of the most challenging off-road trails in the world. It was frustrating, and then the rain picked up and made everything more slippery and dangerous. I would not recommend doing this trail on a 4x4 unless you've done a decent amount of serious off-roading in the past and are good at picking lines. I wouldn't do it on a motorcycle unless you are very familiar with riding your bike through lots of rocky terrain. That said, I'm so glad we did it. It definitely fits the bill for adventure. I'll just say this up front, the second section of the Colorado BDR is easily the most difficult and easily the best. It goes over several of the gnarliest mountain passes in the Rockies and has lots of old mining ruins along the way. The first pass, and maybe the hardest pass of the Colorado BDR, is Ophir. It starts after the tiny mountain town of Ophir, Colorado, and quickly turns pretty gnarly. It has lots of loose rocks and a steady incline to the top. There's no space to pass and not many places to start from a stop if you lose your momentum. There's also an inconvenient cliff of death just to your right the whole time, reminding you that it would be bad to mess this up. The rocks get less loose near the top, but they're still there. We reach the top to find someone on a different type of bike. I'd love to mountain bike this. It sounds amazing, but I definitely do not have the lungs for it. We descended down the other side of the pass just in time to miss about 40 SUVs lining up. If you do this on a motorcycle, don't go on a weekend and wake up early. The rest of this section has several more passes, all of them maybe a little easier than Ophir, but definitely not easy. There are a lot of long climbs with no flat sections and a cliff on the side. I learned a few important things about riding an adventure bike on these passes. The first is that everything is more challenging in your head. Every time we stopped and looked at a climb, I got in my head and thought I couldn't do it. Thought about all the ways it could go wrong. I thought about turning around. Thought about the cliff of death next to me. But once I got on the bike and committed to it, everything was pretty easy. Adventure biking is very physical, but it also requires mental focus and strength. If you just commit and trust yourself, you'll be way better off. Unless you're not good at riding off-road, in which case do not commit and trust yourself. You should be pretty good at this stuff before you get up here. Another related important thing is momentum. You have to keep moving to keep control of the bike. You can't go too slow or the rocks will throw the bike around and you'll fall off. Part of this is looking ahead. If you look right in front of the tire, you'll be too slow and you won't be able to navigate the larger turns and paths. You do have to keep an eye on what your front tire is about to hit, so it's a balance between keeping your eyes far enough ahead but staying aware of what you're about to roll over. Whatever you do, don't keep your eyes on the cliff of death that sits right next to you on most of these passes. I kept telling myself not to think about it, but of course, like trying not to think about a pink elephant, all I could think about was the pink elephant of death looming beside me the whole way up and down. Don't think about it. The altitude really got to me on these passes. I was out of breath most of the time I was on the bike. I wanted to keep moving until I got to the top, but I just had to stop to catch my breath a few times. Fortunately, every bit of this route is beautiful. You could give a disposable camera to a 3-year-old and come away with a calendar's worth of amazing pictures. Free tip here, use these nose strips, especially if you're wearing goggles. You will feel like an old person wearing these, but adventure bike riders are unabashedly old people. We are not kids riding dirt bikes. We are serious adults on serious adventures, and we need to be able to breathe at 12,000 feet of elevation. This section has a lot of mountain passes, but also has a lot of old mine ruins, half-collapsed buildings from the late 1800s when mining was new in the area and a little less industrial than now, and a few buildings that look a little more substantial. It's pretty cool that Colorado has kept this history somewhat intact. On one of the passes, we ran into a group of all vintage motorcycles. This is super cool. This was a group of 30-plus people riding 1,000 miles through Colorado on motorcycles that were all older than 1981. Apparently they do this from time to time in different areas of the country. I'll have to keep an eye on this. I'd love to rebuild an old 70s bike and take it on some wild off-road adventure. We got to the end of this section, but we decided we hadn't had enough, so we went along the bypass route to see what else we could find. Unfortunately, the road was closed. We considered taking the little motorcycle trail next to the gate, but we didn't do that because we follow the rules. And by that, of course, I mean Ted follows the rules. Either way, we explored a bit and found a nice path into the canyons. Another amazing day. Day 4 was more chill than day 3. There were some mountain passes, but they were more like little chill hill climbs. It was mostly smooth dirt roads, at least compared to the previous day, but we did have a few interesting sections, and the occasional giant hawk eating in the middle of the road. I heard a rattle on one of the trails, so we stopped to investigate. One of the bolts holding my luggage rack was coming loose. Usually pretty good at using thread locker on basically everything, but apparently I forgot this one. Our most notable equipment problem on this trip was with USB chargers. I had 2, one on the tower and one next to the key. The one on the tower stopped working before the trip, so I replaced it with a new one that has a watertight seal on it. But somewhere along the line, the accessory fuse blew. I replaced it. Everything was fine for a few hours, but then it blew again. I replaced the fuse again and disconnected the new USB port, but the old USB had just stopped working. Somewhere along the way, Ted's USB outlet also stopped working. So we had 3 USB adapters with 6 total ports, and none of them were working. But sometimes the universe has a way of giving you just what you need, and in the middle of the trail, we found a USB battery pack. It had been slightly run over. We had to pry the smashed port open, but it worked. We watched the camera charge and patiently waited for a battery fire. So, thanks for dropping your battery pack, Burford. For the entire trip, I had been blasting through water crossings with an aggressive confidence. If you can't see what's beneath the water, you can tiptoe through it, or you can just send it. So when we reached an actual river, I hit the gas and powered through. About halfway through. The problem with rivers, and this one in particular, is that they sometimes have large rocks randomly along the riverbed that you can't see. It's a good thing I didn't bend a wheel or pop a tire. Fortunately, it was warm enough out that being a little wet was not a big deal. Unfortunately, I had my shoes in this bag here that was completely submerged, and they were not in the internal dry bag. I didn't want wet shoes, so I was going to take them out and strap them to the back of the bike in hopes that they would dry out on the ride. But to my surprise, very little water got into the outer bag. These Tusk Pilot panniers are about the cheapest saddlebags I could find, and they are highly recommended. You can spend literally 10 times as much on adventure bike bags, but these are great. I printed a mount to attach them to the rack on my bike, but you don't need to get fancy. You can just slide out the inner dry bag when you want to take your stuff out to your tent or hotel. For the second crossing, I decided to walk the river to see what was underneath. More big rocks, but not quite as bad as the last one. Ted took it slow along the edge. I just walked my bike. My boots were already filled with water, so what difference does it make? In fact, after that, I hit every single puddle along the way to our third and final water crossing of the day, which was actually super easy. The sun was out when I decided to Leroy Jenkins it across the first river, but I forgot the old saying, if you don't like the weather in Colorado, just wait a minute. The dark clouds rolled in, and it started raining. Then it started hailing. Then I started wishing I hadn't walked through the river and also hit every single mud puddle along the way. The temperature got down into the 40s. The jacket and pants I'm using for this trip are Climb Induction Pro, and they are great. Like I said, Climb gave me a discount on these because I'm a big-time YouTuber. They are made for hot weather and have a lot of airflow, which is not excellent for freezing rain, but I went with the layer approach. A lot of riding jackets claim to be 3-season with vents and liners, but they're never good at any one thing. This jacket is awesome in the heat, and when it gets rainy, just add a rain jacket underneath. And when it gets cold, I have the $40 Amazon Basics puffy jacket that is light and small and surprisingly warm. So, I was doing fine. Also, before we left on our journey, I decided to install grip heaters on my bike. Grip heaters are amazing. It's surprising how much warmer you feel when just your hands are warm. Unfortunately, they didn't work. Probably something to do with the USB problems I was having. I think my whole accessory circuit is messed up. So I rode on in the cold rain, and then my fuel light came on. We only had 13 miles left to town, and it was mostly downhill, so I figured we could make it. And then my camera died. But I had another camera, and then it died. And so you will never know if I made it to the gas station. No, but I made it. We cleaned up and stayed the night in the cool little town of Buena Vista. Bit of advice here, be sure to fuel yourself up every morning. Fortunately, Colorado has gigantic breakfast burritos pretty much everywhere, so this is pretty easy to do. The day started off with some cool tunnels and a relatively chill water crossing, at least more chill than yesterday. Also, some pretty fun roller coaster dirt roads. We came across a lot of mud puddles and another water crossing. This one was pretty long, but it was shallower than the previous day, and more importantly, we could see the bottom and see that the rocks were smaller, which made it easier to keep the bike going straight. I navigated this with a little less speed and made it through just fine.
Oh yeah! Easy peasy.
I did shortly after get a warning on my iPhone that I've never gotten before about water being in the charging port. Well, there's definitely water in the charging port. It's everywhere else. Ted and I swapped bikes for a bit to test out the differences. My bike is a bit better in the dirt, which Ted used to take off into the off-road. His 890 Adventure was actually pretty nimble in the dirt, and it felt like it had a pretty low center of mass, although you could tell it weighed over 100 pounds more than my bike. On the road, his bike was really nice. The fast road sections really highlight the difference between a real adventure bike and my fake adventure bike build. The Colorado BDR has a lot of amazing off-road riding, but it also has a lot of really great on-road riding. Nice twisty mountain passes and amazing views. We got lunch in Leadville, which is known for great mountain biking. In fact, the famous Leadville 100 mountain bike race was the next day, so the town was busy with mountain bikers and spectators. Later in the day, we found some really fun red dirt, and then some almost fluorescent red dirt. This stuff was wild. I've never seen anything like it. It's like high-vis dirt. Ted was having a lot of fun and got away from me, but fortunately he was doing one of the adventure biker's favorite things, sliding the back end out. Just slightly, just a little bit. Not enough to tear up the surface, but just enough to leave me a breadcrumb trail of mini burnouts on the road. The big pass on this section is Hagerman Pass. Some people say it's one of the hardest sections of the Colorado BDR, and it is challenging. There are a lot of rocks stuck in the dirt, sticking up everywhere and bouncing the bike around. You have to keep your momentum, but you can't go too fast over the bumpy rocks, which makes it tough to keep the bike straight and ignore the cliff of death next to you. I didn't think it was as tough as some of the other passes. I'd rather drive over rocks that are stuck in the dirt than a pile of loose rocks, but different people are better at different things. When we started this adventure, we planned to skip the final section. By all accounts, it's pretty chill and relatively uninteresting, so we replaced the last day with an extra day around Telluride to do the Black Bear Pass. But as we got dinner the night before in Gypsum, we decided to just do the last two sections together in one day. Just over 200 miles, all the way to Wyoming. We got an early start through some rutted up dirt roads. The rain had taken its toll in some areas. In one section, a mudslide had fallen into the road and had recently been cleared. We moved on to some roads around the rivers of northern Colorado. We made it to Steamboat Springs around noon and had lunch at a quiet cafe by the river. Our hotel for the night was in Steamboat, so if we went to Wyoming, we'd have to backtrack all the way back to Steamboat, which we could do on some paved roads, bringing our total for the day close to 300 miles, but we were feeling great, so we went for it. The last section was mostly pretty easy, with one difficult area where we found some dirt bikers and some mud. I came down a hill into some ruts and realized this mud was very slippery. So slippery that I ended up off the trail with some cows in a ditch. As we approached the state border, the end of the trail, the clouds rolled in and the rain hit us once more. Colorado was not going to let us leave without a fight. But as we approached the end of the trail, the state of Wyoming, the rain stopped, the clouds cleared, and we reached the end of our journey. Almost 1,000 miles from Four Corners to Wyoming through some of the toughest terrain and trails in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. We made it. We considered taking the easy paved way back, but we were feeling great, so we decided to do the dirt section in reverse. We fueled up and headed back the hard way. We got back to the slippery mud we saw earlier that day and found out that the bike tires like to go in their own direction. It felt like riding on ice with ruts in it. And then I broke my leg. The bike slipped out from under me, and in the chaos of the bike falling and sliding, my left foot twisted around and broke the lower part of my leg.
Okay.
Bet you didn't see that one coming. I didn't. We were 50 miles from the nearest hospital in the remote woods of far northern Colorado, late in the day on a trail that nobody else was foolish enough to ride. Here's what happened. I drove over a tree in the road, causing my rear tire to slide in the mud. My front tire kept going straight, and the bike fell over. My heel caught on my pannier bag and twisted my foot around. I was going maybe 10 miles per hour. Ted helped me get my bike back to the top of the hill, out of the mud, and then helped me hobble back up that same hill. After you get a major injury like this, it's important to use the RICE method. RICE is an acronym that stands for rest, ice, compress, and elevate. We didn't really have the option to do most of those things, so I changed it to stand for ride your motorcycle to the nearest hospital. So I did. I got on my bike and I rode 137 miles with a broken leg to the hospital in Steamboat Springs. I didn't really have a choice. There was no cell reception, no other cars. We did have the Garmin InReach emergency beacon, but my leg was stable and my foot pointing in the right direction, so we just went for it. Back to the pavement, all the way back to Bags, all the way down to Craig, and all the way into Steamboat Springs, shifting with the heel of my boot, trying to avoid every bump, riding into the night to the emergency room. Remember earlier in the video where I said I never make the same mistake twice? Well, I managed to break the same leg in the same place on basically the same motorcycle, so that was a lie. The bikes were loaded up and carried back home, worse for wear, and I was loaded up and carried back home, worse for wear. But not before one final water crossing. Was it worth it? I don't know. Ask me in a month after I've gone through the real pain of all of this, navigating the American healthcare system. Motorcycles are dangerous, and motorcycle adventures even more so, and you should be aware of this. But don't let the danger be the only thing keeping you from the adventure, because danger is the only way that you can have an adventure. It was an unfortunate end to an amazing journey, and it was an adventure, a capital A adventure. Actually, a capital A, capital D, capital V adventure. A real one, with risk and pain. And even after the break, I would still recommend it. Just be careful, avoid the mud, and don't think about the cliff of death just to your right. Don't think about it. Don't think about it. Stop thinking about it. This is another one of those videos that will not make the money back that I spent on it, which is fine. It was kind of a vacation anyway. I have the best job. But if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe and consider joining the Patreon. Supporters get a sticker about every 3 months. The next one might be a little Superfast Matt with a leg cast and crutches as a thank you for helping me with so many medical bills. Thanks for watching.